Welcome to the Melodology Podcast, celebrating the unsung excellence of melody makers. My name is Arthur Breur. I am your host. I am a composer. I am a melody geek. And we are here today to talk about a very beautiful melody that a lot of people may even think of as their favorite melody. It's been around for years, and it is definitely a classic. Joining me today is a very special guest to me. And this person is a composer. She is a performer. She is charming across the board. And I am really happy. I might edit this a little bit. I am extremely happy to have my friend Anne McKennon. Let me read a little bit of her bio. Anne McKennon is a freelance flutist, teacher, and composer in Jacksonville, Florida. She can be found playing anything from orchestral music to rock and roll and Irish jigs, tin whistle included. She holds bachelor's degrees in music composition from Jacksonville University and business from the University of South Florida. An ardent supporter of community ensembles, Anne enjoys working with community orchestras in the performance of her music. As a composer and a performer, she has a special affinity for programmatic works, especially duets. Her short bio reads like this, and I think this is very charming. Anne McKennon creates music fueled by imagination, dark chocolate, and pulling weeds. There's more than one way to do most things. Anne, welcome to the Melodology Podcast.
Hi, Arthur. Thank you.
I'm really happy to have you here today. We have been friends online through social media, and we have never met in person, ever.
This is true.
And this to me is a really amazing representation of how the world has changed. We can be friends, we can know each other, we can cheer each other on, we can support each other without ever having even been in the same room together. That's a fantastic thing.
Yes.
As a composer, you have a very interesting, eclectic, and fun style, which I find delightful. Tell me about your background in music. Let's start with, what were your earliest influences in music?
Oh, I'm not entirely sure. You see, when I was very, very young, very, very small, well, first of all, I've always heard music in my head. But as a little child, before kindergarten, I remember my mother reading books to me. And I asked my mother to teach me how to read words because I wanted to read the books for myself. My mother did not want to mess up what the teachers were going to do in school, so she taught me how to read music instead. This is pre-kindergarten.
Interesting.
So when I started kindergarten, I could read both music and words.
Wow.
My memories are not very clear of all of that, but apparently I asked a lot of questions and taught myself to read. So I have always read music. And I've always listened to music, and I've always had music playing in my head, and I thought that's something that everybody did. Apparently not. That music is not always something I heard that's replaying. Sometimes I'd just make things up, and I'd hear it in my head and listen to it and go about whatever it was I was doing. So it's just always been a fabric of my life.
What were some early songs that you remember?
I've always known, you aren't expecting me to go here, I've always known Peter and the Wolf.
I would expect you to go there. For everyone listening, Anne McKennon has composed a piece called Ollie the Alligator, which is a narrated piece of music that the Tualatin Valley Symphony has performed. Yeah. And it's charming. It's a fun, short narrated piece that does hearken to Peter and the Wolf. So that's definitely something I would expect that would be a piece of music. And I've heard a number of other people who say that that's some of the first music that they remember as well.
Mm-hmm. Growing up, my parents had records for all kinds of folk singers. They had some Janis Joplin. They had Joan Baez, Kingston Trio, a lot of those, and then tons of orchestral records. And I'm old enough, yes, they were records. So I listened to all of those. I didn't necessarily know any titles, any names. It's just I heard it all the time. I have listened to the soundtrack for My Fair Lady so many times throughout my life that I know apparently every word. I finally got to hear it live as a grown adult. And it turned out, yeah, I knew every single word that was coming. Nothing was surprising. I loved it. I mean, it was absolutely delightful, despite the fact that I knew everything that was going to happen.
Just so long as you weren't singing along in the theater.
No, I was smart enough to keep my mouth shut.
I've heard people doing that in going to see a musical and having people like one row back and one, a couple seats over singing along with what's going on stage. That's
I didn't want to ruin it for anyone else.
Are you a movie score fan?
That one, surprisingly, not so much.
Interesting.
However, the way that the movie score tracks the emotional passage, or the emotional trajectory, there we go, the emotional trajectory of the movie. Without the music, it wouldn't be so effective.
Right.
And if the music does its job, you don't even have to pay attention to the music so much because your emotions take over.
Exactly.
And that is what I like about them. Which might be a backwards way of doing it, but here we are.
Well, so far you're the first guest, and this is episode 6. You're the first guest who has not been a big fan of movie scores. And that to me is an interesting thing because we're all completely different. Some people, I know composers who think that movie scores are just too pedestrian and too kind of either manipulative or too traditional or all sorts of things like that. And I know composers who, like myself, I kind of try to make music that sounds like movie scores because that's part of my influence growing up. So it's an interesting thing to have somebody say that that's not necessarily something that they are a fan of.
Well, I firmly believe that music can tell a story if you let it. And that is kind of the purpose of a movie score.
Right.
It's just that you're looking at the story and then the music fills in all the gaps.
What are some of your favorite classical pieces of music?
Well, Peter and the Wolf. Let's see. Once Upon a Time, Bolero might have been high up on that list, but maybe I've heard it a few too many times.
It's used and played a lot.
It is. It is used a lot. I've only performed it once, but it's used a lot. So, I mean, Peter and the Wolf is definitely high ranking. I also, Symphonie Fantastique.
That's a good one.
I like that very much. I really love music that has any sort of Slavic bent. So if it's any kind of Slavic dancey type thing, I love it. Absolutely love it.
Awesome.
I think Dvorak did a bunch of dances of that kind of nature. Love them. They're fantastic. I still like 1812 Overture. And that is also overplayed, and I can't see what it has to do with the 4th of July, but there we are.
It has cannons. That's what it's got with the 4th of July. It's got big booming sounds in it. That's the only thing about it that really is, that's what makes it 4th of July, is that it has those really just booming sounds to it.
It does. It absolutely does. It's very celebratory. That's what makes it fit. It's just not very American.
Well, the other thing about it that I would say is it's kind of its own movie score. It tells a story, and it's got the whole bombast and it's very, very melodic. It's kind of its own piece of entertainment, as if it were a movie score.
Music tells a story if you let it.
This is a good way to put it. Is there anything about your musical background or your influences that you would like to share?
Well, I would say I've pretty much done it, but the way that music guides emotions or reflects emotions. I love that, especially when it reflects delight.
That I will honestly say that's recognizable in your music because I find your music delightful. And I like that you enjoy creating things that could be described as quirky or fun. And I would say that's part of a signature of your style.
Yes, I also like a touch of dark. If you can get a balance of both, yeah, I like that.
That's good. And you talk about music both reflecting emotions and affecting emotions.
Yes.
And I like to say that any job that you can do where you're manipulating people and it's what you're supposed to do, it's part of your job, or any job that you can do where you can be happy because you made people cry. That to me is a fun place to be.
Mm-hmm.
Making people cry in a good way, obviously.
I don't want
to make people cry for bad reasons. I want to make people cry for good, emotionally healthy reasons.
Yes.
This Agreed. Song probably made some people cry or potentially made some people cry.
Mm-hmm.
And when we get back from a short break, we will be talking about our melody for this podcast. Welcome back to the Melodology Podcast, celebrating the unsung excellence of melody makers. I'm Arthur Breur, and with me here today is composer and flutist Anne McKennon. And today we're going to be talking about a melody that a lot of people may have as one of their favorite songs. We're going to be talking about The Rainbow Connection. The Rainbow Connection is a song from the 1979 film The Muppet Movie, with music and lyrics written by Paul Williams and Kenneth Ascher. And I'm reading this from Wikipedia, by the way. The song was performed by Jim Henson as Kermit the Frog, and it reached number 25 on the Billboard Hot 100 in November 1979, with the song remaining in the top 40 for 7 weeks total. Williams and Ascher received an Academy Award nomination for Best Original Song at the 52nd Academy Awards. What are your memories about this song, Anne?
This one speaks to me because of the emotional content. It is both a waltz and a lullaby.
Oh.
It has all these large intervals that feel like they're reaching, but you're reaching for a rainbow and you can't catch a rainbow. It is hopeful, it is wistful, it's full of dreams, which reflects, of course, the lyrics. The text painting is fantastic. And just a touch melancholy, and it's made that much more poignant when sung by a frog. With a banjo.
With a banjo. And in fact, Williams and Ascher were asked to compose a piece that was going to be Kermit the Frog singing with a banjo, playing, accompanying himself with a banjo. They were told that was what this piece was. They were told that this is kind of the want song. And Paul Williams has said that he was thinking in terms of this being like Somewhere Over the Rainbow, and that this is very much, he was inspired by the song When You Wish Upon a Star from Pinocchio. And both of those melodies are melodies that I want to explore on this podcast because they're both fantastic melodies. And this piece acts as that want song at the beginning of the Muppet Show. It's talking about desires and dreams and what you want to have happen, where you want to get to. And that's a really beautiful idea. It's a very classic, timeless message in this song, which I love. It's something that you don't have to put into any particular context. It really is something that in any time these words are meaningful and can resonate with any particular person.
Yes, and in fact, the wish that he's expressing is not specific.
That's a good point too.
Which makes it fit so many different things.
Yeah, he's not wishing for any particular thing. He's just wishing for that rainbow connection, as it were. That's a great observation.
And that's vague.
It is.
So apply it at will.
And something we'll notice in this, and we'll start looking at this melody in just a second, something we'll notice is Williams and Ascher, they composed this piece of music. They wrote this song knowing that it was going to be Kermit the Frog singing it. They knew for a fact that it was this character, and they wrote this song with his character and his speech patterns in mind.
Mhm.
Anything else you'd like to say before we start looking at the melody?
I love music that paints a picture or tells a story. That's what I try to do with most of my music, and this does all of that.
It does all of that, and it does it brilliantly. So let's
Yes.
go ahead now and let's look at the melody. What we're going to do is we're just going to walk along the melody like it's a path, like we've never seen these notes before, even though this is a song that we know very, very well. Let's just look at these notes and look at them in terms of what is it that we see as the music is playing. And I'm just going to play the first kind of 2 lines of the piece of music at this point. So what do you see about this melody just from those notes so far?
Okay, I see that it's very little stepwise, a little bit, but most of it leaps. It's reaching upward. Full octave for your first phrase.
We mentioned this is similar to, or serves a similar purpose to Somewhere Over the Rainbow and to When You Wish Upon a Star. Both of those have octave leaps, but this goes up an arpeggio and then a couple steps, going up an entire octave. And that upward motion, as I've talked about before, that upward motion, emotionally in music, when notes are going up, we tend to feel elation or happiness or excitement. And also representationally, we're talking about aspiring to higher things. So the whole idea of this melody really probably could never go down and have the same emotional impact as the notes going up.
It's wishful thinking in note form.
That's a great way to put it. And it is doing arpeggios. It's leaping between the notes of the chords. I'm noticing that the highest notes are going down the scale as we reach them. And we'll notice this more a little bit ahead. You can see as I'm looking ahead, I'm cheating and looking farther to the right on the notes than we've played yet, but I'm seeing that that peak note is going down the scale one step at a time.
Yes, it is.
Now, I had mentioned that this was written with the idea of it being sung by Kermit the Frog, and it was his verbal style, his way of speaking, that this was focusing on as far as the way they were writing the music. And that's why it's the "why are there so many?" Versus it being "why are there so many?" Like, why are there so many songs? I mean, it could have been that, but it wasn't. It was this upward pattern, 3 notes, and then the little dotted note pattern. I'm just going to play that one little bit right there again, the very first part. That is vocally, there's a little bit of music that comes in before this, the famous little banjo riff that opens this piece. But as far as the melody, this is the beginning of the melody. And we've already just established this 3 notes up and then a step up pattern after that 3-note arpeggio.
I would also point out that in the arpeggio, we don't start on the tonic.
We don't end on the tonic to start with either. We're going from the third note to the third note.
So it's not rooted. It's more wishful because it doesn't have the same root.
Right. It hasn't landed yet.
Right.
I also notice, I mentioned the top notes going down. So we have the top note of the first phrase, so many. Then we have rainbows. And then the next note, like I said, going down. Each 2 measures, we end up landing on those notes, going down the scale as we're reaching. But then at the bottom, it starts there. It kind of contracts a little bit in that second phrase, kind of comes closer together. It may or may not be intentional. It may or may not have an effect, but it's interesting how the bottom and the top are kind of moving along together with each other or moving in different directions. All right, let's go ahead and play a little bit further through. I'm going to play the first phrase and then the second phrase following so we can kind of see how the pattern continues and how it changes. So we have, again, the 3-note arpeggio, but they change it up a little bit in this it's kind of the third phrase that I would say, or it's a third repeat of the pattern, but they change it a little bit when they get to this. And here the lyrics are what's on the other side. And other is no longer the little upward step pattern. It changes right there.
Yes, and because it goes down and then back up, it's kind of like it's peeking around, or trying to.
I like that.
It's text painting and done beautifully.
It really is. And I notice here, even though we do go down step by step, it doesn't land there in the phrase. It doesn't land on the tonic. It ends up on the sixth note of the scale. And it's kind of also a suspended set of chords right there. So even though we've kind of gone down the scale, the songwriters aren't landing us on the final note of the scale. We are still kind of wandering around and searching.
Mm-hmm.
Now this song, like a lot of songs, repeats very much the same from verse to verse. There's not a lot that's really different between verse to verse. Some of the chords are slightly different, but here's the second phrase, and it's almost exactly the same. Pretty much exactly the same kind of a thing going on that second time. It's repeating like a poem. The next stanza of the poem is the same pattern of rhythms in the words, and they're repeating the same patterns of notes in the music.
And look at the words. Rainbows are visions. They're only illusions. And that just reinforces the fact that we don't land on the tonic. There's no place to land. It's just reaching. Searching.
There's a story behind the title of the song. They knew it was going to be about rainbows, and they started writing these verses about rainbows and about searching. So they clearly knew what they were trying to do with coming up with a piece of music that didn't sound like it was solidly in place. It didn't have a foundation. It really is kind of wandering and looking around.
Mm-hmm.
So let's jump past that second stanza. And now we have something that's completely different. This could be called a pre-chorus, or this could be called the beginning of the chorus. This is a completely different melody than we've heard so far. And it really does kind of keep that wandering, floating kind of a feeling. So we have this, just kind of repeated notes. I'll point out the top note in that point at the beginning of that part. This on the chord it's a D major 7 chord. It's kind of the first time really that the main note of the melody has not landed on 1, 3, or 5 of a chord. We have a main note of the melody landing on this kind of, I always think of major chords as being sparkly. I a lot of times when I think of sounds of music, I get visual references. And I think of a major 7 as kind of being a sparkly sound. And this part, the accompaniment in the piano, has these nice little rolling arpeggios in it. So even though you're just kind of going back and forth wobbling on these two notes, there's kind of a sparkle to the accompaniment as well as to the chord.
And the melody focuses on this big old open fifth. But that top note, as you mentioned, it's not the 1, 3, or the 5, it's the tension note.
Right.
It creates this urgency.
And we've talked about perfect fifths as being a heroic interval. Here, the heroism of it isn't there because it isn't fixed in the root and the fifth of the chord. It's the third and the seventh of the chord. The seventh is this very precarious spot in the scale. I just recently shared an image that I created showing each of the steps in a scale as if they were steps going upstairs, and how the steps of a chord are like landings. So you've got a landing on the first note, you've got a landing on the third note, you've got a landing on the fifth note. And then when you get up to the seventh note, it's only a half of a step up to that octave. So it's like you're not at the top of the stairs. You just want to take that last step to get to the top of the stairs. And the seventh scale of a chord, especially a major seventh chord where it's just a half step from that higher note, it wants to just kind of go that next little bit higher. So it's an unstable sound. And again, using, visual words, it kind of is a wobbly sound. Another thing I like about this phrase is something that is used often to represent being off balance or waves or leaning back and forth. And that is the same two notes repeated in a 2-note pattern, but across a 3-beat measure. So each measure, the other note starts out the measure on the downbeat. So it kind of does wobble back and forth. It wobbles back and forth between the two notes, but then it wobbles back and forth between the measures as well.
Totally true. Totally on board. And as for the heroic fifth concept, to some degree, based on the lyrics, heroism may be a strong word, but it's challenging the notion. Well, I mean, so we've been told, and some choose to believe it. I know they're wrong, wait and see. I don't know, just taking a different point of view. And that takes a certain degree of strength.
That's true. It also does take a certain degree of being willing to be off balance.
Yes, it does. So you've got that open fifth thing nested in the sparkly chord. So you've got the off balance and you've got an attempt at strength or challenge all at the same time.
I'm going to be looking at the progression of the intervals and the notes here again. We again are going from the top note of that C sharp, which is the third of the scale. In this whole 4-measure phrase, we're going up to that, starting out at the F that's at the bottom and going up to that C sharp, which is the third. The next phrase, again, 4 measures later, this is just a very stable, even though it's wobbling, we're at a stable harmonic spot. The chord itself and the notes are what's unstable. The next phrase, we move inward, really. It goes up a step on the bottom and down a step on the top. So it goes up to G and up to B for the high note in the phrase. Kind of, again, gradually, I think, compressing toward the main note of our scale.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and play all of that, and then we will move into the final part of this song, the catchphrase of the song that has the words Rainbow Connection in it, the final part of this chorus. What did you notice in that?
The open fifth section has that tension where it's challenging convention.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the next statement, I know they're wrong, wait and see. It's like, hey, I'm going to tell you a secret. And again, a bit arpeggiated, sort of. And then it goes back to straight arpeggio. Someday we'll find it, the rainbow connection, where now the top note's rising.
Yeah, I'm noticing visually looking at this. And this is a good time to point out that this is a podcast, so we're trying to talk about these notes and make sure that you can hear what it is that we're talking about. But also the video for this podcast, we're recording this on video and we are sharing a screen and looking at a screen. That information will be shared on the Patreon channel for this, patreon.com/Melody Podcast. And you can see what it is that we're looking at. Something I'm noticing right here in this spot where they're saying in the first verse here, the first time through, and I had this conversation a little bit with Dale Trumbore in episode 4. She was talking about how sometimes the first time you go through a melody, you fit the melody to the words, but then the second time you go through, maybe the melody doesn't exactly fit the words so much, but you're kind of stuck with the melody at that point. I think at this point, I'm wondering if it's intentional or not. This is the only place I think in the song where there's really a downward arpeggio. I know they're wrong, wait and see. Wrong is a backwards musical reference. So this is wrong, wait, and. But everywhere else, the arpeggios are going upward.
Yes. And the home note is the leading tone.
Right. Yeah, we're back on the leading tone of our main scale, the leading tone of our A scale. And something else about this wobbly section, we've gone gradually moving closer and closer to the tonic note of the chord, but we've been just floating. At first, we're floating like 2 steps away from the tonic of the chord. In that, so we've been told, and some choose to believe it, we're going back and forth. That part is like 2 steps away from home.
Yeah.
And then we're kind of here. It's a little bit deceptive because we're getting closer and closer, but the chord, the background there, the kind of foundation of that chord is a little farther away than 1 step away from home. But the notes themselves, they're 1 step away from being on the main note of the chord.
Yeah.
So it's as if we're pushing towards something and still not getting there. But to have this go over 4 whole measures of one chord and then 4 whole measures of another chord, for the rest of the song, the chord changes have been at least 1 per measure, if not 2 per measure. And the song has been moving, wandering around. This part of the song, this past part of the song, has been very suspended. It's been suspended, but it's been still moving toward where we're trying to get to, or this thing we're trying to reach.
Mm-hmm.
And then we do get to the tonic note on Someday We'll Find It, but the chords aren't the tonic chord. So here's Someday We'll Find It. Oops. Here is Someday. Well, it's not playing. Why is it not? Here again. Here is Someday We'll Find It. So we're on the note where we've reached the home note of the scale, but we're not on the home chord of the scale. So even though we're there, the resolution hasn't happened yet. And then in this next repeat of almost that exact same pattern, the 3 notes up, a movement down, but then a step up in the second measure. In the first part, it's this. The first part, it's the Someday We'll Find It. And then from there, it becomes the Rainbow Connection. It's the name of the song. It's what we're looking for. Listen to what happens. We have an accidental. We have A sharp. It's not in our scale. It's the only accidental in the whole piece. And we're supposed to be landing at our home note, and suddenly there's something different that has happened.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's amazing that right at the words, the Rainbow Connection, suddenly something surprising. There's surprise in the words. There's surprise in the notes. That to me is just really beautiful and really remarkable.
Sparkle.
Definitely sparkle. Now, to go back to what I was talking about earlier, they were writing this song and they had all of the verse words about, what's this about rainbows and what's this about in the, another verse, it's wishing on stars. And so they had this concept of, somewhere over the rainbow, the idea of wishing on a star, but they didn't have the actual title of the song. They didn't have this final thing. And Paul Williams and Kenny Ascher talk about how they were talking to Kenny Ascher's wife, Kate Clinton, and they were saying how they had this really great song and they were very excited. And it was about rainbows, and they just hadn't found that rainbow connection. And I've heard stories where it's Kenny Ascher's wife who said that to them. Oh, well, you just haven't found the rainbow connection. And they're like, oh, that's it. But they tell the story that as they were explaining it to her, they suddenly realized that, they came up with the idea right there as they were talking about it to somebody else, that they hadn't made that rainbow connection. And that became the title of the song.
Light bulb moment.
A light bulb moment. A rainbow moment. There's a title for a new song, A Rainbow Moment. I think that's hysterically funny that they were working on the piece of music, trying to come up with the theme, and finally just talking it out with somebody, they came up with what it was. It does seem to me a lot of times where you're you're just like, I can't think of this, but you're talking to somebody and telling somebody about the conundrum. And as you're explaining it to them, you just use the words that turn out being the thing that you're looking for.
And sometimes I find my, let's say, practice of pulling weeds does the very same thing.
Yes, getting yourself outside of trying to think too hard about something.
Right.
It's a good technique. But I find it really amazing that when we reach the goal of the song, which is the rainbow connection, something surprising happens.
I also find it interesting that in the phrases, someday we'll find it, the rainbow con, just that portion, those high notes reside on the seventh of the chord. So that's the unstable position. But when
that's right. So A is the seventh of the B minor chord for Someday We.
Mm-hmm.
And then B is the seventh of the C minor seventh chord.
C sharp minor.
Or C sharp minor seven chord. So that's an unstable note too. And those, I mean, they're doing an arpeggio, but those arpeggios are not on the main notes of those chords.
Right. They're focusing on 3, 5, 7. So when it gets to connection, the end of the word connection, we have the A sharp, which is the color pitch. It's the third of the chord, and it's suddenly stable.
The next thing that we have here is the very, very ending of the whole, really the ending of the melody, where it is the lovers, the dreamers, and me. And that's this right here. So even though the rainbow connection, that note is a surprise and that kind of accidental, it's something unexpected is right there, then the songwriters finally lead us back to the home note. And I'll point out, the last 3 notes of the piece are the same kind of notes that we've been teasing through the whole time, that third down to the tonic.
Right.
So the whole time that we've been kind of teasing around landing on that A on an A chord, we finally get that at the end. And it's the lovers, the dreamers, and me. And I kind of like the fact that they're landing on the tonic on the person who's singing the song.
Right.
All these things and me.
It creates emotional resolution. That's really all I have to say about it. We've been so far away from the tonic chord for quite a period of time, and now all of a sudden, we've landed.
There is no place in the entire song where we are on an A that is on a downbeat, because, the main melody passes an A.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no place in the song that we have landed on an A on the main chord, on the tonic chord, until the end of the song.
Yep, emotional manipulation 101.
Leaving everything completely unstable and unsatisfied until the very end. And kind of where you think there's going to be a satisfied moment, you're given the surprise. After the surprise, they bring it home.
Mm-hmm.
I want to share that accidental. I thought about that accidental, that rainbow connection, that A sharp, which you're kind of trying to get to the landing note, the tonic of the piece, and we have this surprise thrown at us.
Yeah.
What would it sound like if it didn't have that accidental? So I just took that accidental out. Instead of an F sharp 7 chord, I made it an F sharp minor 7 chord.
Mm-hmm.
This is what that final phrase of rainbow connection sounds like without that accidental in it. So there is charm to it, and it's pretty. That's what, that's sort of what you might expect. And that's why that one accidental, that one note creates so much magic in it, because it is the unexpected thing that happens, and they time it so that it happens right where it is the goal that we're talking about finding.
It's where you don't expect it to appear, and there it is. You don't expect it to come right after the leading tone. G sharp should lead to A.
Yeah, that's another good point, is that the scale there Not only did they tease us by throwing in the first accidental, you're right. They tease us by making the first accidental not the home note, where you should be landing on the home note.
Yep.
Emotional manipulation at its finest.
Uh-huh.
And I
love
it.
it.
Now, the song isn't over here. There's a little bridge and the song changes key, but the entire second half of the song is very much the same melody.
Yes.
It's all the same melody, just raised up a half step. And that's a songwriting or musical composition technique that, because we're rising up a little bit, it adds to the emotional excitement. It adds to the intensity. It adds to that elation when you change a key like that. I even had somebody, tell me one time I was composing a piece of music and I'm like, well, I just don't know how to make it any more exciting. When I come back to the melody again, and a friend said, well, just raise it a half step. So it's kind of a manipulation technique. It's one of the tools in the toolbox for heightening the emotion of a moment. But the second half of the song, the melody is the same melody.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you want to talk about on this melody?
Up to this point, no. But after the second ending, we've got more.
After the second ending, we do have more. The very end. So the second time we have someday we'll find it, the Rainbow Connection. I will just go ahead and play through to the end there. This is a half step up. So talk about that.
At the end, the la-da-da-dee-da-da section, if that doesn't rock you to sleep, you're doing something wrong. It's consoling, it's sweet, and it is so very Kermit the Frog.
Oh, good point. And the lyrics here are just la-da-da-dee-da-da. It's very much
nonsense.
Lullaby kind of sounds.
Yeah.
It doesn't get any higher than the piece is gone. It doesn't get any lower than the piece is gone. And it does just take us kind of back right to the home note in a very rockabye kind of way.
Yes.
Now, this does happen in the bridge. That same melody is in kind of where before the key changes. There's this little section after the second verse.
Mm-hmm.
He sings "All of Us Under Its Spell."
Yes.
And that's that melody. So it's not the first time we've heard it. It's not like it's just out of the blue. Here is "All of Us Under Its Spell." So that's a key change right there. It's
kind of a bridge.
A harmonic change. Yeah, and that leads us to kind of surprisingly, it leads us to a new key. Mm-hmm. And that is another accidental in the piece, where that key change happens. It takes us out of the key, but it takes us out of the key with the intention of taking us a step up.
Right.
The whole melody right there doesn't have much that's exactly like the rest of the piece. But when it gets to "Probably Magic," we have the 3 upward notes and followed by 2 upward notes, very much the same pattern that we've had throughout the rest of the piece. Mm-hmm. Although it's suspended on magic, which I think is kind of a nice magical touch. That the upward notes when you get to the word magic, and that's this right here. That 2-note pattern has been stretched out for the word magic, emphasizing the word magic. But that melody that we have at the very end, it doesn't repeat the same exact way. Here, it's used as a bridge. It's used as a way to move from one key to another key to add additional interest, because if you just play the same melody exactly the way you've played it 3 times through, if you're just repeating the same thing over and over, it can sound a little bit monotonous, even when it's a beautiful melody like this. Just having nothing to change things up, it's the same melody 3 times. It starts becoming more of a ballad, a long epic ballad where it's just verse after verse after verse after verse. In this case, you throw in the bridge to add a little bit of interest, to change things up. They jump the key up a half step to add that extra tension and that extra excitement to it. But they also have this little lilting lullaby melody that they use for that transition. At the end of the bridge, they make it unstable and push you into the next key. At the end of the entire piece, they make it very stable and very calming and very relaxing, taking us back down to our new home key, which is a half step up. We're now at B flat instead of at A. I'm just going to play that one last bit one last time. And again, we have that, not only have we landed on the tonic because of the lovers, the dreamers, and me, we've gone through a little harmonic progression that just keeps us firmly established in the key, keeps us resting there, along with a little lullaby to kind of relax us and carry us off into the next scene, where in the movie Dom DeLuise shows up in a canoe.
Well, there you go. It's dream state.
Yeah, it is. It's dream state. Well, the song, the whole thing is a dream. It's about dreaming. And to end it with a little lullaby like that is another really clever idea, another clever concept, another very brilliant way of putting all of the pieces together to make this song so amazing.
Yeah. I'm going to need a nap later.
I need a nap now. All right. Well, let's take a break, and then we will talk about some stuff that you brought with you to share today and what's going on with you in your life.
Okay.
Welcome back to the Melodology Podcast, celebrating the unsung excellence of melody makers. My name is Arthur Breur. I am your host, and I am here again today with my friend and amazing composer, Anne McKennon.
Hi.
Anne, this part of the podcast is about you as a composer, what you're up to, what you've done, things that you're proud of, and perhaps connections, in this case, rainbow connections, with the music that we have been looking at today. Tell us about what you'd like to share.
Okay, I've got 2 things with me. Now, most of my catalog of music is chamber music. I've done a few large ensembles and only a handful of songs. So we're going to start with a song, naturally. And the song is one that I wrote for my nieces. And while Rainbow Connection was written for the child inside of all of us, Sherwood Lullaby I actually wrote for children. They are teenagers now, but they were very small when I wrote it. It's a lullaby. It's a waltz. It is wistful. It's dreamy. And there is a verse for each child. And then the verse at the end is go to sleep.
Nice.
And the bridge in the middle is just dreaming. So it has a lot in common with Rainbow Connection. It might be a good companion piece on a concert.
Nice.
Hopefully.
Plug.
And the commonalities were completely unintentional, but it's emotional trajectory. So the verses, little ones, sing with me, always in my memory. I'm thinking about, in this case, it's the oldest niece. We actually sat at the piano and sang songs together.
Fun.
Fairy wings and butterflies dressing up a child's delight. She actually wore butterfly wings when we went to a park. She was 5 years old at the time. And they had a little butterfly house. So I had gotten her some butterfly wings for a monarch butterfly. You strap them onto your shoulders. And she was wearing that as we walked through the butterfly house.
How fun.
So these are memories. And the second verse, little one Cheshire grin, a whispered voice I'm taken in. She would grin, both top and bottom teeth, just big as, the grin was big as can be. Her top and bottom teeth were tiny. She was a little girl. And she would whisper a lot. She was the quiet child. And then color for an artist's hand, all the hues at your command. She is still fascinated with nail polish. So, melody. We're in the key of G. I start on the third. It's mostly skips, but then always in my memory. Those are steps with a skip in the middle. Na-da-dum, ba-da-dum, la-da-da-da-da-da-dum. It's very cyclical. The chord structure behind it, the chords are not shown on the screen, but it's mostly, there are filler chords in between, but it's mostly 1-6-5-4, 1-6-5-4, 1-6-5-4, over and over again.
Let's go ahead and listen to the first part of the piece.
Let's do that.
That's really beautiful and charming.
Thank you. Every verse has that pattern. So little one, I'm rising up, sing with me, rising up a little higher. Then I take a step higher, always in my memory. Memory comes down.
Mm-hmm.
Then that same melodic pattern repeats again. Then when I get to the chorus, who am I? That one's a drop. Who am I wrapped around your finger? I like the big skip, and then I do some kind of wandery.
Mm-hmm. It's also kind of, the wrapped around your little finger is almost like wrapping, the notes are kind of wrapping themselves around, which is fun word painting.
And I would like to point out that I wrote this tune before I had my music degree. So I did not know what text painting was. This was pure instinct.
Well done.
So thank you. Every verse has this kind of thing.
Little one, a Cheshire grin, whispered voice I'm taken in, color for an artist's hand, all the hues at your command. Who am I wrapped around your finger? Always I'll be on your side. Never fear, for you're in my heart. I've loved you from the start. Castles of wonder, they make believe, pictures of magical scenes. Tell me the stories cast in your dreams. The best is yet to be.
Castles of Wonder. Castles stays on one note. It's speaky and it's wistful, but it doesn't go very far. It allows your imagination to fill in the rest.
Mm-hmm.
Castles of wonder, play make believe. Rising because we're making believe.
Mm-hmm.
Pictures of magical scenes. Rise up. Tell me the stories cast in your dreams. The best is yet to be. Resolution.
Aha.
So in the bridge, I take a deviation from the key of G. I'm not stuck to it.
Yep.
But by the end of the bridge, I'm back on it.
So I like that as far as with the theme of us going from searching for something to finding something, where you're there saying the best is yet to be, there's that looking forward nature of it, but then there's also sort of the statement that you get there.
Or it's still coming. I mean, the best is yet to be. Who knows? There could be more.
Mm-hmm. And I'll point out also, since we're comparing this with the Rainbow Connection, the bridge here is very stable overall. It doesn't move around that much chordally. It's kind of a floaty section, again, similar, not necessarily similar to the bridge, the short bridge in Rainbow Connection, but similar to what we would call maybe the pre-chorus section, where they've got that kind of wobbly, floaty section here. The bridge of this piece is very much kind of floating and, again, moving itself towards a resolution, but doing so in a suspended way, a suspended, stretched out kind of way.
I don't spend a lot of time on the tonic of whatever chord I'm in. Castles of Wonder, Castles is an E minor chord. I'm sitting on the third. It's stable, but it's not the root.
Right.
Because the best is yet to be. And I want to inspire dreams. This is all about imagination and dreams. Then the final verse, little ones go to sleep. Your eyes are tired, the rest will keep. I am literally singing them to sleep. And that pattern is the same as all the prior verses, and the chorus happens twice, and then the piano takes us out.
It really is beautiful.
Thank you. Now I want to say night-night.
Needed a nap before, now we really need a nap.
I mean, it's literally, well, obviously it's a lullaby. It's part of the title.
Right.
So that is Sherwood Lullaby.
And it's beautiful. Very well done.
Thank you.
You also had brought another piece of music that's not just a voice and piano, not just a song. Tell us about this next piece.
Okay, this next one, I have loved Celtic music forever. And Brian Boru's March is a tune that I learned when I was a teenager. It was in a flute book that I have. And I just love the tune. Now, with Celtic music, the tradition is melody. So, Melodology podcast, melody. So this particular tune, the melody is rather repetitive. The A section has a whole bunch of descending figures. The B section changes, but then the C section is basically the A section again. It's kind of an AA, BB, AA with just a slight twist because there's an octave jump. So it is very internally repetitive. And I decided to turn this particular tune into a piece appropriate for a full orchestra. So I had to think about what I could do to the melody and the various treatments of what went around it to make it suitable for a full orchestra, because nobody wants to hear the full orchestra do the exact same thing, especially that internally repetitive, over and over again. Eventually, some change is good. So what I did was to create 3 different vignettes of this melody. As I said before, I like my music to tell a story or paint a picture. So that's essentially what I was going for. In the very intro of the piece, I imagine a lone piper, which is an oboe, playing this tune maybe out on a grassy hill at a distance. And that piper plays only the A section once. That's just the intro. And then imagine the screen pans out, and then you have this entire panoramic view. And to get the panoramic view imagery or feeling, I have arpeggios going through the strings from the bottom to the top, and then to the bottom, and then to the top. It just goes through da 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 da. So it just keeps going across the stage, literally. And then we start playing A A B B C C. And each time there's a repeat, we add voices, we add intensity, the treatment changes. And my imagery for that first section, first vignette, is a slow march into battle. This is Brian Boru's march. Brian Boru was the last High King of Ireland. So he was a king. And he was king like over 1,000 years ago. So imagine what it took to become king 1,000 years ago.
Good point.
There were some battles, lots of them. So for the first one, I did a slow tempo. I kept the A minor. The chords that were on the theme that you were looking at, those are the chords that I decided to do, but I've played it before with different chords. Traditional tunes don't have specific origination, so there's no concrete.
Why is it that all the pieces that are 1,000 years old don't come with a lead sheet?
They could have just chopped it into, I don't know, get a chisel and put it into stone or something. That would have been handy.
So we're going to play through, and for those watching, we're going to be looking at the YouTube video of the score, the orchestral score for the Brian Boru's March. This is arranged by Anne McKennon.
That was the intro, so that's our lone piper on the hill. And then we get the panoramic strings, which you can see at the bottom of the screen.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we'll play the next section. us what's going up next.
So that was the intro and the first vignette. I had double grace notes. I had articulations done a certain way. Then for the second vignette, I went more fife and drum corps. So it starts with percussion, and then we add piccolos, and then we slowly add everybody else. I changed the voicing for the B section to make that stand out differently, and that gives it different color. And I've changed articulation for this B section. So think fife and drum corps, it's a little bit faster and gives it a new color. It's also in a different key. Just like we talked about before, you change the key. So I did the first one in A minor, the second section is in E minor, and the third went to B minor. So I went up a fifth or down a fourth, depending on how you look at it, for each different picture. So here, it's more of a brassy parade. So let's just assume they won the war and they're having a parade. My point of this, bringing this one, is that I can look at the melody in different ways and manipulate it in different ways. Change the speed, of course, changing the key keeps a longer piece more interesting. Change the articulation, change the voicing. It changes how the melody affects you. And that's what I've done with it. Now this third one, this one is a big twist. The melody is bum bum ba-dum bum, but I turned it into ba-da-dum bum bum. So I made it literally a march. It's no longer in 6/8. It's going to 2/4. It's very marchy. I changed the key again. But everything I've done is based on the melody. I just twisted it a little bit. And from here on, it's a brassy parade romp. There's no slowdown at the end. It just barrels right through. It's fun.
That is fun. And earlier you were talking about how you like music to be fun and you like fun in music. And this last section it is a romp. It's play. It's musical play back and forth between the different sections. You play some tricks on the listeners where you have a repeated pattern that you repeat, and then you don't quite repeat it the same way, like a little jest. I love the counterplay between the different sections where they're just kind of talking to each other back and forth.
I think of it in, depending on which spot you're looking at, there are places where the lower voices are giving the theme and the upper voices are just fireworks at the parade.
I was watching the score, and again, the score is available on our Patreon. This video is available on our Patreon. This video that we're watching is on YouTube. You can go to Anne's YouTube channel and see these different things that are happening here. And visually, I can see how you were creating little, fireworks launching up into the air and exploding up in the heights.
Yeah. The piccolo and the xylophone had a good time. There's some conversation and some just flat out fireworks. And then that moment where I take the melody and put it in the low brass augmented, making it larger.
Stretching it out.
Yes, another compositional trick.
Yeah, another compositional technique is taking the intervals of one part of a melody and then just making the intervals bigger. So rather than maybe steps, you're turning those into jumps or leaps and gradually making them bigger. It expands and adds, potentially adds excitement to that sound.
So this was how I took that rather straightforward, repetitive melody and made it work, my opinion, for an orchestral concert stage.
And you did. You made it very interesting throughout. You have this challenge of having something that repeats every other measure and repeats and repeats and repeats, but then turning that into something that is different and interesting and paints a picture. And it comes across as very film score-ish because you're telling a story. And you describe it. You even describe it as picture this. And for someone who maybe not be a fan of, outright fan of film scores, you were talking about the camera pans out. And so you're thinking in the same. I
still enjoy films.
Right. But you're thinking in that visual way that we have, both sound and vision in films. And when you're just listening to a piece of music, it's your mind that creates the pictures.
Right.
And if you have something where you're potentially giving it a possible story behind it, giving it a little bit of a program to it, that then lets our minds picture those things as we're hearing those notes. And this piece does that very nicely. The way you describe it matches up with what you did. And per your signature style, it is fun.
Yeah. And there's still some dark. It's still minor. And the first vignette, I picture them going off to war. It's a slow march to war. So it's still got the dark. But at the end, they won.
And they celebrate.
We don't have to look at how they won.
with fireworks.
Yeah.
So what are you working on right now? What's coming up for you?
Right now, I'm working on a silent movie score.
Fun.
So that movie is 49 minutes. I've never written a 49-minute piece in my life. The film is called Hypocrites.
Okay.
So it's The Hypocrites. Silent movie from 1915. And it is about hypocrisy. So when trying to do this movie score, I sat down and I watched the entire movie a few times, and I took a lot of notes. I put timestamps and the action and everything that's happening. And it boils down to 3 sections. The first would be modern day, which was 1915 at the time. Then the second, they do not exactly a flashback. They're trying to tell an old legend. And they're not specific about the time period, but I would say Renaissance-ish. And then the third section goes back to modern day. I'm having those things affect my soundscape choices. So for the modern day, I do have some thematic elements that happen over and over again, but they change. So I change the tempo, sometimes I change the key, sometimes I change the instrumentation. And for the entire piece, it's supposed to be live percussionist, one live percussionist, and recorded sound. And I am an acoustic person. I am not a weird recorded electronic sound. That's not me. I really do like acoustic. So I am using notation software, Finale, and I am creating an actual musical score. And I'm using a string ensemble, but I am using it in pizzicato because I can only use the sounds that are going to sound right recorded. Because they're going to be fixed media. It's not going to be a full ensemble. So I'm using that string ensemble in pizzicato. I use an oboe. There are a couple of percussion sounds that I use in the recorded part because the percussionist is busy doing other things, and he only has 2 arms. I've met him. So, but I use that kind of a soundscape, percussionist, mostly marimba, but some other things, with mostly strings and a little bit of oboe for the modern day. And when it goes to historical, I switch it to a recorder consort instead of the oboe because it fits. And then I use a lute sound, which is sort of lute soundish. It's sort of maybe a lute-strung harpsichord, spinet type sound. It's got enough of an old world sound that works, and I combine that with the live percussion. Mm-hmm. And that gives it a more old world feeling for Renaissance. And now I am doing the last section that's back to modern day. And I'm taking the themes from the very first and twisting them. And the latest twist is taking this simple little melody and I turned it into a tango.
That is a twist.
It's a twist. But I'm not finished yet. I am 85% there. I'm going as fast as I can, but oh goodness.
Well, if you are not used to doing this, if you're not, first of all, creating 49 minutes of music is a lot of work. Uh-huh. And creating 49 minutes of music that fits to what's going on screen is an entirely different level of the work. I'm amazed at film score composers, especially the ones who can work very, very quickly at creating music that not only enhances what's going on in the story, but in film scores where it's not a silent film, they're supposed to stay behind the voices and the actions and the sound effects. They're not supposed to be noticed.
Right.
And when you're doing a silent film, the music is carrying a lot of the story to it. And I'm usually surprised how much I forget about the music while I'm watching a silent film as well. And you're just caught up in the emotion of the moment that's created by the music.
And that's exactly what I'm trying to do. So I'm trying to follow the emotional trajectory of what's happening on the screen.
Does this project have a deadline, or is this something you're doing just to do and to have it completed?
It's a commission, but it's not real clear. I haven't been given a hard deadline, but this is a part of a project where a professor is doing a series of silent films, each one scored by somebody else. He scored one of them. And they are going to relate to societal issues. Each movie is different, of course. And so I chose Hypocrisy, The Hypocrites, because it was a female director.
Oh.
In 1915.
That's good to know. That's a very interesting
And so I thought,
thing.
Okay, female director, female composer.
Good choice.
So that's what I've decided to do. And the person who has commissioned me to do this has given me free rein to make him do whatever I want him to do.
Nice.
So, I can make any sounds. I double checked because I wasn't going to do a weird electronic, I keep saying weird, a manipulated electronic sound. Mm-hmm. I'm an acoustic person, so I'm using those kinds of sounds. And that's fine. I can make him play whatever instruments I want him to play. So as long as I have to keep in mind what's physically possible for one percussionist to do.
One percussionist with just 2 arms.
Yes, with only 2 arms, yes.
This is a 2-armed
But
percussionist.
he also has legs.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a spot where I need a drum, so I chose a kick drum.
Ah.
Because he's also got to play the marimba.
Okay. You're doing all-out percussion.
Yes, all-out percussion. So kick drum, and I've heard him do that kind of thing before, so okay. But mostly he's only playing one instrument at a time.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned not using manipulated electronic sounds, I think for a period piece, and also for something, when you're jumping back in time within the period piece, having anything that was overtly electronic sounding or overtly synthesized sounding probably would draw you out of the scene, potentially would draw you out of the scene.
That was my thinking as well. So I wanted to stick with sounds that made sense. The percussionist is a very accomplished vibraphone player, but the vibraphone was not a thing in 1915.
Right.
So no vibes. But the marimba's
Only good vibes. Only good vibes, and the marimba is in.
Yes.
Well, when this is finished, you will have to share it with me, and I will make sure that we share it with the listeners of the podcast so that they can hear the final, or they can see and hear your final score to The Hypocrites.
Yes. Someday he will actually do the live recording, but I have to finish it first. But 85%, I'm working on it.
Excellent. I want to thank you, Anne, for joining me on the Melodology podcast. It's been a delight having you. It's always fun talking to you, and it's fun seeing the different things that you put on your channel. Please, everybody, go and look up Anne, and where can they find you?
I have a website, so www.aemckennon.com. That's AEMCKENNON.com. And that is, A.E. McKennon is my tag for my Facebook musician page and on my YouTube channel. And if you search my YouTube channel, you will find Cinderella's Stepsisters by our own Arthur Breur that I got to perform on flute with a pianist, and it was the most fun thing ever.
Oh, thank you for that. And you're also A.E. McKennon on Twitter as well.
I am. Now, that is a personal account, so it's not just going to be music. But you want to be my friend? Okay.
Who wouldn't want to be your friend? You're delightful. And this is the Melodology Podcast. We are at melodologypodcast.com. On all the social medias, we are Melody Podcast. My name is Arthur Breur. You can find me at arthurbreur.com. It's BREUR, 5 letters, and the last 3 letters look like Europe. Thank you again for listening to the Melodology Podcast, where we are celebrating the unsung excellence of melody makers. Come back for the next podcast soon.